and profile is just an abomination.
It's finally happening. I've been promising it for maybe 6 months, and I know recently I put up a post and I said it's coming guys, it's on its way, and it wasn't a lie, it wasn't a truth, but it's happening now. And I've been making these promises just the same as my parents when they promised they would take me to Disneyland, except that never did happen. Yeah. As most of you probably know, my mum watches all of my YouTube videos, so yeah, she's probably going to roast me in the comments, that or I am so dead. Today we are going to learn how I draw faces. So disclaimer, obviously, there are so many different ways to draw a face. I have a particular way that I like to draw mine, and you're obviously here because you want to know how I draw faces, but it's not the one true way to draw a face. You know, everyone has their own style and we're all going to draw faces differently. If you're interested in how I do it and my technique, then let's get into it. Pick up your iPad drawing device or your sketchbook and let's draw together and make some beautiful faces, or ugly ones, whatever. First thing you need to be able to do, it's so easy, anyone can do it. Draw a perfect circle. If you cannot draw a perfect circle, then I'm sure your friends and family still love you, but you need to step up and accept some responsibility here. Okay, that was obviously a joke. Anyway, so let's not get too caught up in the wording here. I mean this in a traditional sense of what is considered feminine and masculine. So let's have a little look at the type of features I look for in a typical feminine face. The overall shape is softer, which coincides with rounder. I like to make the chin and the jaw smaller. Bigger eyes to get that cutesy Disney look, and I tend to veer towards a fuller lip. And for the typical masculine features, well, it's pretty much the opposite. I like to make everything a little bit sharper and more angular. A larger jaw, smaller, more square-shaped eyes, and slightly thinner, less defined lips. Like I mentioned, this is more a stylistic approach to how I like to tackle the differences in faces. And my style is not just limited to this list either, there's plenty more, but these are the main things that I focus on. Let's have a look at the front profile. I've collected a few references from Pinterest which I will link in the description, and all faces have a neutral expression for the purpose of this tutorial. When I look at faces, I primarily look for the shapes that I can use. So when it comes to the head, the skull, I'm looking at a circle, and when I visualize that circle, it essentially captures everything above the jaws. So it's the head, the eyes, and the bottom of the nose. To visualize the symmetry of the face, I like to put a line down the center to get the perspective. Obviously it's very easy in the front profile since it's right down the middle, but this guideline is really going to help you place the features in their correct positions. For me, getting the eyes in the correct spot kind of helps everything else fall into place, so I like to make sure that I put a line on that circle to determine where the eyes are, and that's generally in the bottom third of the circle. Don't worry guys, this is not going to get any more technical than this. I like to keep it quite simple. From there, I simply like to connect the upper and lower jaw to that circle, so I will draw some slightly angular lines from the bottom of the circle where the ear will be down to the chin. And don't forget your neck, it's kind of important. Now that I've taken the reference away, you can see the basic idea of what I'm visualizing when I draw a portrait or any kind of face. It's essentially just a circle, crosshairs, and kind of like a pointy bowl. And those ears connect where the top of the jaw and the circle meet, which is essentially where your jaw is connecting into the rest of your skull. Now let's take a little look at where the eyes are placed on the skull. I've marked out the length of the eyes here, and the distance between the eyes is 1 eye length. Let's get to the scary ugly bit. This is literally how I draw all of my faces. I just use loads of circles. They're basically just placeholders for the features, but doing it this way is quick, and it also lets me see if I have put them in the correct places in relation to each other. So now I'm going to put all of that into practice. And I've deliberately left this part in because, as you can see, I cannot draw a perfect circle. Because it's not important. At least that's what I tell myself every day. So as you can see, I'm starting with my circle, my crosshairs, and my slightly pointy bowl. Of course, not forgetting the ears and the scary circles for my features. And that is honestly how I start every face. I just use these shapes to make sure that I have the proportions somewhat correct, because I can make those changes as I go along where I see the mistakes. But for now, it resembles a face, and that's good enough for me. So that's when I can start to go in and actually define the shapes and the lines correctly. This is currently playing in real time so that you can see how long it takes for me to define these features. I think it takes approximately about 1.5 minutes. So bear with me on this because it's fairly slow going. It looks really slow, but we get there fairly quickly. And this is still just my basic sketch in a sense, because this gets the foundations down before I correct any serious mistakes before I would get to the colouring stage. It's really important for me to not spend a ridiculous amount of time at this stage, because if I start picking at the details early on, I'm really not going to notice any of the issues with proportion or sizes at this stage. So that's why I tend to try and do this quickly, and it's definitely something I would suggest that you implement into your workflow at this basic sketch stage. And once I'm happy with that basic under sketch, I will then reduce the opacity, put a new layer on top, and this is where I'll draw my final face. I don't know what I'm saying. Final sketch? Yeah. Now I've sped this up to about 4 times the original speed because this part isn't as important for the learning process, because I've already shown you how I actually tackle the placement of the features on the face, and I'm going to go into some more educational type stuff afterwards to show how these understandings have affected the final sketch. And just while this is playing, I also wanted to say that my intention is never really to capture likenesses 100%, because these are supposed to be stylized studies. So I also don't want to get so wrapped up in, oh well, that doesn't look exactly like the eye, it's not the correct shape. It's really just to kind of practice my proportions and get the general feel for the reference, but doing it in my style. So once again, don't ever feel pressurized into feeling like your sketch or your study has to look 100% like the reference, because it doesn't. Okay, so here we are now at the finished sketch, and let's have a look at these proportions. I'm checking the eyes, and they are the same size, and they also have the length of one eye in between the eyes. Now let's look at the entire head. I like to break it up into 3 different sections, and this is the easiest way for me to tell if my proportions are correct. In general, from the very top of the head to the very top of the eyes is about half of the length of the head shape, and from the top of the eyes down to the chin is the second half. We can also divide from the forehead down to the chin into 3. From the bottom of the chin to the bottom of the nose, from the bottom of the nose to the top of the eyes, and from the top of the eyes to the top of the forehead. And these are all the visual cues to help me figure out if the face is kind of looking like the features are where they should be. Let's get into the 3/4 profile. The same principles apply. I used the circle to determine the top of the head to the bottom of the nose. And to determine the angle of the face, I draw a vertical line down using the nose length as my guide. I add my eye line guideline. Oh, that's a lot of lines. And don't forget now that this is a curved line, and it is more evident in this angle. It's really important now to be thinking in terms of 3D shapes rather than flat shapes. Just making sure I get my creepy circles in there just to place the nose, the mouth and the eyes. This slightly pointy bowl shape is going to be a little bit more skewed at this angle. So it's really important to make sure you're observing the angle, which is kind of squished on the far side. Yeah guys, this is so technical. The easiest way I can describe how I visualize it is that I use a swooping line from the top of the head all the way down to the chin that is slightly at an angle. So now we're going to put that into practice. I start with my circle for my basic head shape. I then use my vertical guideline for my nose and to show the angle of the face. The shape of the jaw can be tricky, so it might take a few times to get this bit correct. But see how on the far side of the face, you see where that swooping line comes from the circle, where it goes down to the chin. And the side closest to us has that definition of the jawline. I place the nose where the crosshairs meets with the intersection of the circle. And just underneath that, the circle for the mouth. Because the face is at an angle, you want to define the length of the nose. or stylistically, if that's not what you do, you don't need to do that. I realized that I did not draw the swooping line for my eyes, but I'm visualizing it, so that's why I didn't draw it. You can see that I'm being quite careful with how I draw in the jawline, and that's because I'm really observing the reference, because it is one area that I do struggle with. It's a hard feature to try and explain, so it's really important that you use your observation skills. As you can see, I don't even bother with the hair, it's just the general shape of the skull that I am trying to imply here, because then I know how the hair is going to rest on top of the head. Like I said, this is just the initial sketch, just to make sure the placement of all the features is in the correct space. Once I'm happy with that, I can go ahead and do my second sketch, or my final sketch. Once again, I've sped this up 4 times. There's no new learning here, so just enjoy. I have a tendency to draw noses a little bit longer than they should be, and you can see here that I fixed that mistake as I'm drawing, because it was kind of hard to see it during the initial sketch stage, and it's only when I started putting more details in that I really noticed that the nose was a little bit too long. So I used the transform tool basically just to bring that nose a little bit higher up on the face. I also have individual tutorials for drawing eyes, nose and lips, so if you're interested in those, check those out after this video. I am just checking everything that I've put into practice, so I draw my circle for the head shape, which encompasses the skull down to the nose, central line, which indicates the direction that the face is pointing, the placement of my other features in relation to one another. Whoa, that's ugly, but it gets the point across. And a good tip to check the proportions of your features in relation to one another. You can pretty much divide the space between the eyes, the nose, and the mouth into 2. So between the eyes and the nose should be around the same distance as between the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the lips. And once again, checking the proportions of the entire head from the forehead down to the chin. You can split the face up into thirds. Okay, here it is, my nemesis, side profile. Repetition is key, everyone, so let's just do the same thing again. We draw our circle, and to capture the protrusion of the nose and mouth and chin, I'm basically drawing another swooping line from the tip of the nose downwards and inwards to where the chin would be. I'll show this later on, but for the eye placement, it's essentially the length of the eye again away from the edge of the circle. So let's put this into practice. I draw my circle, my little step, and my swooping line down to indicate the protrusion of the nose, mouth and chin. I've also added another little swoopy line outside of that circle because our foreheads do come out a little bit more than what is indicated. So it's just an additional guideline for this angle. I draw in the ear where that jawline meets the circle where the skull is. And I'm also indicating now the actual shape of the skull behind the ear and the top of the head, because the circle isn't the entire size of the skull. I like to think of it as putting a nice warm hat on top of our circle. So I've added the nose here that has come away from the circle, since I actually cannot add it to the circle this time due to the angle. So it is just an extension of that stepped line. I'm building on all of these lines just to flesh out the structure of the head and to make sure that it is a bit more accurate. It is tougher at this angle, so it is really, really important that you observe your reference. I find at the side profile, I tend to stylize a lot more than I would in any other angle, and I think it's because I do struggle with this side the most, so I tend to exaggerate the features a little bit more, and I think it's just to get away with how difficult I find it, and it's something I definitely need to work on more. That's something that I can definitely admit to. Once I'm fairly happy with that sketch, I then once again lower the opacity, new layer, and I will draw on top my finished sketch. And for some reason, I'm not sure why, but you cannot see my under sketch. It's there, but it's not showing up, so I'm sorry about that, but I'm basically just following my guidelines anyway. I also approach this in the exact same manner when I'm drawing traditionally with a pencil, except obviously I do not have a layer underneath, but I do work in layers in the sense that my initial sketch is extremely light. I never go heavy on the pencil on my very first sketch, so I make those shapes with a very light hand, and then I go in afterwards and lay down the pencil a little bit heavier for my second sketch. So for me, general rule of thumb is the length of the eye is about the same distance between the eye and the edge of the face. The same rules also apply when breaking down the face into thirds. So forehead to the top of the eye to the bottom of the nose, and bottom of the nose to the chin. It's also important to note that the ear lies in between the top of the eye and the bottom of the nose and follows the angle that they are directed into, so it's always going to sit in line with the eyes and the nose. I also like to split the side of the head into thirds as well. So I fit all of the features, eyes, nose, mouth, into the first third up to the corner of the eye. The next section goes from the corner of the eye to the beginning of the ear, and the rest is the back of the head. And those are pretty much the essentials that get me through drawing any type of face. I realize that I've only drawn feminine features today, but I do think another tutorial is required for other angles and perspectives, for which I can probably draw more masculine faces. So thank you for watching this video. I hope that you found it really helpful, the way that I show how I draw faces. Let me know in the comments what you think, and if you do try it out, how did the technique work for you? Please consider subscribing and liking, and I will see you in my next video.
Don't go there. Don't even. It's all gonna be good. It's gonna be fine. So it would be really easy, and so you can. Let's just say goodbye. But let's just keep things simple. I don't actually draw that in until later. No! I'm having such a tough time with this. It's really important to stay positive. This is your sign to get out of that comfort zone and start drawing perfect circles.